These are the speaker tapes of Fifth Dimension Young People's Group Alcoholics Anonymous, a virtual group meeting every night at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific. Enjoy.
I have a sponsor who knows she's my sponsor. I also sponsor other women. I um I have a home group. It's Worcester Young Peoples. We meet in person on Tuesday nights in Worcester, Massachusetts at St. Matthew's Church, 695 Southbridge Street. If anyone's ever available and wants to come or wants to speak, please reach out to me or my buddy Nick. He's a longtime member of 5D. So I just want to preface this by saying that this meeting, I came to it many years ago before COVID, and I'm really grateful that you guys. It was interesting. I actually chaired the online meeting panel, or it was at MSCYPAA in Boston in August of 2019, and I met some of you, and I chaired the panel, and I had been to this meeting just a couple of times, but it was just kind of like, I don't know, it was like a weird premonition, right? Like chairing the online meeting panel, not really being an online meeting person, and then the pandemic hits, and at that point I was really struggling with I wasn't staying sober, and yeah, so it was just like kind of like a little weird, like God shot, like kind of like like I knew that meetings existed online, and I knew that this meeting existed before the pandemic. So it was just like this little God wink. So I'll just start at the beginning. So I started drinking and drugging when I was young. I was probably like 12 or 13 years old. I got what I now know from, getting into the book with a sponsor, that experienced the phenomenon of craving. And what that looked like was like I craved more. I had that peculiar mental twist. I all I could do, like once I had started drinking, was like I just obsessed. Like, who am I going to do it with? Where are we going to do it? How are we going to get more? And I was never satisfied. Like, even when I was drinking, I couldn't, like, all I could think about was how to get more, like more, more, more. And and obviously at like 13 years old, I couldn't get my hands on alcohol that often. So it was like a weekend thing, and it was like stealing from my parents. And it just, you know, the obsession was persistent on days when I wasn't drinking. And it began to rule my life. A lot of people, like, they say that the disease of addiction or alcoholism runs in families. There's definitely some like overtones in my family. But my parents, they are still married to this day. I come from a loving home. I have a sister. I grew up in like a small town, and that is like not what makes me an alcoholic. That this disease does not discriminate. It sometimes it runs in families and sometimes it doesn't. I definitely think there's a little bit of a family history, but I'm definitely like one of the few in my family to get sober and through AA. And you know so yeah, so I started drinking and drugging, and like I'm so grateful for my family. They have supported me through all of this, and it wasn't a perfect upbringing, but it was really good. And I don't know, going to the guess of desperation, like I kind of think about like what I put my parents through, and I'm grateful to have this program because I've been able to since make an amends to them. So this disease is progressive. It talks about that in the book. I progressed pretty rapidly. I managed to graduate high school, but like I had to get a doctor to write a note because I literally missed so many days of school. And I do think it's important. I always touch on this. Like, I am dual diagnosis. I was diagnosed as having a mood disorder when I was 15 years old. And like, that's an outside issue, but it's like chicken or the egg situation. Like, my alcoholism and my mental illness progressed as my alcoholism progressed. I wasn't treating my mental illness, and they just kind of like to play with each other. So, so what happened was I graduated high school. I applied to 6 colleges or 7 colleges, got into 6 and waitlisted at the 7th, and then made a choice. And I opted for a small school in Worcester, Massachusetts, because it was the devil, like I was like, oh, I can't go to UMass Amherst. If I go there, like that's UMass, that's a party school, I'll die if I go there. And like I knew I had a problem, but I decided to go to a small engineering school. And I kind of joke sometimes that I like came out of a blackout with a degree in biomedical engineering. And I would joke and like call myself an alcoholic, but I really wasn't. I just, sorry, my dad's texting me. Anyways, yeah, so I would joke that I was an alcoholic. I knew I had a problem, but I didn't know how, like where or how to get help. And I ended up, getting this dream job out of college. It was super cool. I like to touch on this. I worked on a particle accelerator and like literally like a superconducting synchronous cyclotron. It was a massive machine, but it was, for me, it was like, it was just, I bring myself everywhere I go. Like, it doesn't matter where I go to college. It doesn't matter who my friends are. Like, if I'm an alcoholic, like I'm a drink and like I'm a ruin my life. So what happened was I ended up getting, I lost that job, and I had all these rules, and they're kind of around like drugs, but so I'm not going to touch on that. But my disease just really rapidly progressed, and I ended up getting arrested in November of 2015, which was my original sobriety date. And what that looked like was like, I got this, I can only look at it as like a higher power intervening in my life. I got this like feeling that everything was going to be okay. For so long, I had lived with this feeling of impending doom and like knowing that I was like on borrowed time. And so I ended up getting arrested. And I remember my dad picked me up from jail. I went to actual jail, not a holding, because I my parents were away. It was like a perfect storm, right? Like my parents were away. Like I feel like if I hadn't been arrested, I would have died that weekend. And I ended up going to jail and getting bailed out. And my dad bailed me out. It was a Friday. It was Friday the 13th of November 2015. And I got arrested, and I ended up going to jail, and my dad picked me up, and he didn't want to bring me home. He was like, if I bring you home, you're gonna use, you're gonna drink, you're not gonna go to treatment. So he let me smoke a cigarette in his Infinity. And like that just shows me like how desperate he was and how much he loved me, because my dad loved me, but he also really loved that car. And he ended up letting me smoke a cigarette on my way to treatment, and I went to a dual diagnosis facility, which honestly like saved my life. I got introduced to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Actually, wait, that let me back up. It was my second Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I had actually been to one when I was around 21, and it was interesting. I always say this, like, you won't always remember what people say, but you will remember the way they make you feel. And when I was, out there, I went to that AA meeting, and I just remembered I went to this. It's a really cute meeting. It's called Mendon and Mendon Young Peoples, and it's in Mendon, Massachusetts. And everyone there got sober in the 80s pretty much. And like they got sober young, and now they're old. So like when I go there, like everyone's like, there's a back wall of like old men, and they all have nicknames, and like it's adorable. And it's been that way like since I was 21, and like it continues to be that way today. And so yeah, so I get arrested, and I have the gift of desperation. I just want to get sober. You could have told me to do like any number of things, and I would have done them. Like if you were like, it was just, I was so desperate. I was so scared. I was potentially facing 2 years in jail. And so I went to my first meeting, and someone made a suggestion, and I don't know if I actually haven't heard this from anyone else, but it did help me. They told me to write down everything I did for my recovery. Like they were like, well, if you've got a court case, like write down everything you do for your recovery, and it'll, you can show the court, but also it's for you. And like, this is a great suggestion. And I was like, okay. So I wrote down for over 300 days. I wrote down every single meeting, every single group, every single thing I did. And it's kind of cool. I kept doing it for a while even after that, and the court never wanted to see it. They put me on probation for a year, and they gave me random drug tests, and they were like, yeah, we don't just see your little book. But I kept the book, and I still have it to this day, and like it's really special, and it has, you know, signatures from people who of various meetings I went to, like a court card, and like some of them aren't with us today, because like it's important to mention that this disease is you know, it's progressive and also potentially fatal, and like unfortunately I have lost a lot of friends along the way on this journey. um but you know, at the same time, I've also seen like people, you know, get sober and get sponsors and go through the work and like get married and have babies, and like I've seen wonderful things, and like I myself have made a complete turnaround in my life. So I think it was like, I want to say like 3 weeks sober, I went to Worcester Young People's, which is my home group today. And I sat next to this girl, and she was like crocheting or something, which is what I do now. And she was like, um, they made an announcement, an announcement. It was actually about ECPA, which is actually happening this weekend in Florida. If anyone's going, I'm actually going. But it was the Eastern Area Convention for Young People in AA, and it was happening in New York that year. And this girl made the announcement, and I didn't end up going, but I whispered to the girl next to me, the girl who was crocheting, and I was like, what's EPA? And she was like, oh, just you wait, you'll see. And it was so funny because she did exactly what any upstanding member of AA should do when a newcomer asks a question, is check in with them and see what their next meeting is going to be. And so she told me, she was like, oh, tonight's Tuesday, why don't you go to Mendon and Mendon on tomorrow night? She's like, I'll let my grandpa know you're coming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a young people's meeting. It's so funny because I told you the old men in the back. So, you know, I went to that meeting and I heard about things like NECIPA host, and I ended up going to join NECIPA host. I met Eldon on, I think it was on at NECIPA host, and we hosted the conference in Boston on New Year's Eve at the Sheraton. And it was so much fun. And like, I had a great time. But as I mentioned in my story, like I got sober in May of, I originally got sober in November of 2015, but my sobriety date now is May of 2020. So there was a lot that happened in between then. But so, you know, I got complacent, right? Like it's interesting how your higher power kind of intervenes in your life. I started, you know, I kept doing this thing. I would get a sponsor, get on my 4-step, do the reading, and then I would start writing, and then I would promptly switch sponsors. So I did that like 4 or 5 times, and like I just was getting complacent. And I would talk about like wanting to relapse in meetings. Like I would say stuff like, oh, I'm just gonna smoke weed, or oh, I'm just gonna do this, or maybe I'll drink and not do like drugs, or I would, you know, all the substitutions. And I ended up you know, I was on probation for a year. Like, you know, AA, the steps, outside help, all like really, really is important. But sometimes you need even more than that. Like maybe it's jails, institutions, whatever. So like for me, probation was a really strong external support while I was kind of like messing around with like not doing the things I was supposed to do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was gonna relapse. Like I was like prepared. Like I had the date set. The date was gonna be December 15th, the day I got off probation. And like I had this plan in my head. And the thing is, my higher power had other plans for me. On December 7th of 2016, my best friend who I'd made in the program, like we'd been friends for 11 months. And yeah, so we'd been friends for 11 months. And I talked to her the night before she died. I asked her if or the night she did die, I asked her if she wanted to go to Worcester Young People's. I invited her out to dinner. I told her I'd pay for her. And like the next day I got that call. And that really broke me. Like we were on host together. She was the arts chair, I was the program co-chair. Like we did everything together. Like it was just absolutely devastating. And like to this day, like I post about her, I miss her, I talk to her mother. Like I've been talking. I met her son one time. She didn't have custody, but it's just absolutely like heartbreaking. And but like that grief kept me sober. like that fear and that grief, like fear sobered me for a bit. So I ended up I kept coming. MSCYPAA happened New Year's weekend. I stayed sober through that. I wasn't being fully honest, and like I don't know at which point or what times in my story I wasn't being fully honest, but I was abusing other substances. In the 3 years that I claimed to be sober from 2015 to 2019, 3.5 years. But I definitely stayed away from alcohol, and I I my disease was, I wouldn't say arrested. Like I was decompensating both emotionally and spiritually. So, but in it was unfortunate at 3 years sober, my doctor, I was having a lot of problems with like my health, and my doctor was like, maybe we could try like this to help you lose weight, like take you off your psych meds. And I went into a manic episode, and that manic episode lasted a year. And during that time, I I was a mess. Like people in AA loved me through it. People in AA, women in AA, really just like I remember being in a room full of people at MSCYPAA in Vermont, and I was in a room of 1,000 people, and I felt all alone, but I wasn't alone. Like I ended up crying, and I was crying in the hallway, and some girls from New York just like scooped me up, and they were like, "It's gonna be okay. You're gonna get through this." And um like that love and stuff, like literally, like I was at a jumping off point, a point where I didn't want to live anymore, and like that love in the halls like saved me, at that time. And so fast forward, I ended up let me just look at the time here. Okay, so fast forward, I ended up going relapsing in 2019. I got like a really good job that I currently still have today. I started working in a pharmaceutical industry, and I I just couldn't stay sober. I kept doing this thing. I'd get 4 months, I'd relapse. I'd get 4 months, I'd relapse. And the last time I relapsed, my parents even knew I was drinking, and they were like, just don't do any other stuff. Like just if you could just like keep the alcohol under control and like not be really sloppy, like we will let you stay here and live in our house. And the thing is, like, I just like it's never enough for me. Even when I'm drinking, like I remember feeling so powerless. Like I took one drink and I snuck out of my parents' house, and like it was just chaos. And one thing to mention before I get to that last relapse was this was right when the pandemic hit. So NSCYPAA, the New Hampshire Convention for Young People and Alcoholics Anonymous, was supposed to be happening that year on March 13th, 2020. And if anyone remembers March 13th, 2020, that is the year the world shut down. I mean, the day the world shut down. So what ended up happening was everyone was freaking out about the coronavirus, and I had some, like, I don't want to say insider knowledge, but like my company was very vigilant about it coming up to it, because like we make vaccines and that kind of thing. So we were taking it really seriously when like maybe other public people weren't as serious about it. And so I was like, I got really like self-righteous. I was like, listen, even if NSCYPAA isn't canceled, which it should be, I'm not going because I don't want to be a super spreader. This will make AA look bad, blah blah blah. And I was fighting with people on social media and just attacking people. And what ended up happening was like I didn't know this at the time, but like I needed that conference. I needed that love. I needed to be in the middle of AA. And what ended up happening was like, yeah, I canceled going. And then like less than 24 hours before the conference was canceled. And life as we know it, ceased to exist. And for me, like I just spiraled after that. Like I would go on Zoom meetings and I'd be like, I just can't stop drinking. And I ended up the last day I was out there, like I got honest with my parents, and they were like, okay, tomorrow you'll go to treatment. Well, you know what happened when tomorrow came? I wasn't ready. Like I wanted to just get one last, and I just wanted to get messed up one more time. And I almost didn't make it. Like I remember I got dropped off by a girl who had an unregistered car at a liquor store, and I called my mom. I had overdosed, and I couldn't, I had like peed myself. Like it was terrible. And I called what ended up being my sponsor today, or not today, sorry, for the first year of my sobriety, the sponsor I went to the work with. I called her and she said to me, so she had lost her fiance due to this disease October 1st of 2019. And she said to me, be grateful you're alive, be grateful you have a bed during a global pandemic, and you never have to feel this way again. And she was right. Like, those things are true. Like, if you stick with us, if you do, like, there's the promises, like, they do come true. And it's all about, sometimes it's hard to like interpret the promises. Like, people think that like life is going to be all rainbows and butterflies. That's not necessarily true, but like, you don't have to feel the way you feel when you're out there. Like, you don't have to feel that mental obsession, you don't have to feel this feeling of impending doom. And so yeah, I went to treatment and I just hit the ground running this time. I got out, I started meeting with my sponsor weekly. We were on Zoom meetings, we were hosting Zoom meetings. I continued to stay on host for MSCYPAA, and I ended up just hitting the ground running with the steps. I put my notebook next to my bed and I wrote, hit my fourth step every single night. Even if I didn't want to, I would write 1 or 2 turnarounds every night until it was done. And when I was 11 months sober, I did my fifth step. And things really started to change for me. Like, I got out there making amends. That hour with God was super painful for me. Like, I'm all over the place, but I did it. I pushed through. I just had the gift of desperation. And, I wrote a list of character defects and the assets associated with them. And, amends are tough. Like, making an amends to my parents, I wanted to wait until I moved out of their house to make the amends. And so a little less than a year ago, I made that amends. My life has literally shifted like so far. Like, it's not about the material things, but like, in the time that I've gotten sober, like, I've been able to go back on the nationally competitive skating team I used to skate on. They kind of kicked me off during the manic episode and I like wasn't able to compete with them. So they accepted me back and we placed 5th at nationals and I got to skate. I wasn't an alternate. I was able to, I've been promoted 4 times at my job. I was able to buy a house. I have a townhouse and my little Nicky Poo here lives in my basement. It's wonderful. We fight sometimes, but like, I love my living situation. My dogs, it's hard, like, they're old and they're sick and I'm just really scared that like of what's going to happen when they die, but like, I'm able to show up for them. When I got arrested in 2015, they were in the crack crate for 20 hours while I was in jail. And like, the way I make that up to them, my living amends, is like to be the best dog mom that I can possibly be. And yeah, so I ended up just hitting the ground running. There's so many things. Like, I got into grad school, I dropped out of grad school. I it's just been like completely different. But like, today, like, my life, like, they talk about like not being in a relationship for the first year of sobriety, and like, that's one piece that like I haven't looked at really, is like, not that I don't know. I had a little wink from my higher power, like a little sign, which is there was this guy and I just like fell, like, not in love. I was just like having a little crush. And he asked me, we'd been hanging out. I posted a picture on Facebook and no one liked it. I was like, this is a sign that he's bad news, but I had no idea. I didn't really know him. And we had a lot of mutual friends, so I'm like, that's weird. And then he asked to borrow $50 from me. And this was when I was like 6 months sober. And I gave him the $50 and then he ghosted me. And like, I was so upset. I was like, what happened? And I was like, trying not to blow up his phone. I was trying to be chill. And about, I would say 3 or 4 months later, over the summer, I was at a AA meeting. An outside AA meeting. This was still during the pandemic because I was like 6 months, and then yeah. So, and this guy who I'd met through him was at the AA meeting, and he was like, "Oh my God, thank God he ghosted you." He was like, "He took me for $10,000." Like, he was like, "I relapsed. It was awful. I almost died. Like, we relapsed together," and that was like God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And like, it's just like hard sometimes believing in a higher power. I'm just gonna like end with one last thing. When I was 10 years old, I had two friends pass away from like one had a brain tumor, one had a subarachnoid hemorrhage. She just didn't make it. They both died 2 weeks of each other. So I was like, if God is real, if God kills children, like I'm all set with God. But when I got into this program, like they told me to try to believe in something greater than myself. And so I ended up for the first couple of years of that, like, time where I was trying to be sober, I would say, oh, I'm trying to pray. And people will be like, trying to pray is praying. And I ended up, just having really like hard times. I remember one night I was struggling. I knew I was going to drink the next day. I like didn't want to. I had work really early in the morning and I couldn't sleep. I felt this feeling of impending doom. And I just prayed for like 1 second, and as soon as I prayed, I fell asleep. And I sleep with the TV on, and I woke up the next morning, and the TV, which like wasn't like a TV that like normally freezes, it was frozen on something that said "Stay on track just for tomorrow," like an insurance commercial. And I was like, that's weird. Didn't stay on track, but I did get sober shortly thereafter. So I don't know, like there's just been like so many signs along the way. And like the most powerful one is kind of a crazy story. And this is my last thing is I was my best friend who passed away in 2016, her name was Sarah Fox. So I've always kind of seen my like higher power as being like a fox. So I got offered this job at a really cool company, and I was like, should I stay at my current job or should I leave? My current job that I'm still at today, spoiler alert, they had been really good to me when I was like relapsing and when I like needed to take time off for like treatment and everything. So I was like, well, there's something to be said for that. I don't know. So I'm like torn. So my friend's like, look for a sign like a bear or an owl. So I picked fox, and I was driving, and not 20 minutes later was there a fox in the road with my friend. And the fox, I saw its little eyes fluoresce, so I knew it was alive. I pulled the U-turn, I grabbed the fox. It's like hit by a car and on the road, and I scoop and run, and we get it to Tufts. And so this fox is just like in my car. It's not biting me. I'm just holding it. And we get it to the vet, and there's blood everywhere. It's just a mess. And I'm like, that's crazy. There was a fox, but it was hit by a car. What does this mean? The next day I get a call. They're like, did the fox bite you? I'm like, no. They're like, well, it might have had rabies, so we had to put it down. I'm like, oh my gosh, the fox is dead. What does this mean? What does this mean? So I'm talking to my friend. This is like a few days later. I'm still going back and forth with the company, negotiating a higher salary and like going back and forth, trying to make the decision. And I'm talking to my friend on the phone with driving with my friend. And I say, I'm telling her about the fox, and I'm telling them. And the last thing I say is God is real. And we hit a deer, like literally hit a deer. Car is totaled. Like I've never had that happen before. And I'm like, I don't know what to do here. So, I ended up turning down that job offer and staying at the position I have currently. And I ended up getting promoted again. And, it's like, it's kind of crazy, but like, if you don't believe in a higher power, like for me, it's like, I prayed to something I, didn't believe in and got results I couldn't deny. And if you're struggling with that, like that's okay. The way I look at it is like, if I get to the end and it was all baloney, at least I'll have lived a better life believing in a higher power. That's it. I'm Becky. I'm an alcoholic.